Legacy. The first time Sarah took John's hand and pressed it to her stomach, he thought she only wanted comfort. He had been counting supplies in the back of the Humvee by the dim gray wash of morning, trying to ignore the ache in his neck and the deeper ache that came from being too awake for too many days in a row. Water first, then fuel, then the bandage roll he had already cut into thirds so it would last, dried meat, protein bars soft with age, the tiny bottle of iron tablets he kept wrapped in cloth so they would not rattle, his notebook, the rolled maps, the revolver he hated, and the knife he trusted even less. He was making columns in his head because columns behaved. Columns stayed where he put them. Fuel in one, food in another, time in another, pain in another. Sarah caught his wrist before he could keep going. "Here," she whispered. The Humvee rattled over a seam in the old highway. Ethan muttered something from behind the wheel about the road trying to spit out the axle. Sarah guided John's hand down and held it there. At first he felt only warmth beneath layers of worn fabric and the tautness of her belly under his palm. Then something small and definite pushed back. John forgot the notebook in his lap, forgot the cold sweat between his shoulders, forgot the map route they had argued over the night before. He looked up at her. Sarah was tired. He could see it in the shadowed half-moons under her eyes, in the way she had been bracing one hand against the door all morning, every time Ethan jerked them around a pothole or a rise in the road, but she was smiling, not much, just enough to undo him. "There," she said again. "Told you." Another little thump. Not hard. Just alive. In the front seat, Ethan snorted without turning around. "Kid already knows to complain when your driving gets bad." "I'm not the one driving," John said automatically. "Then tell your child to complain louder." Sarah laughed softly, and that sound, small and real inside the steel shell of the Humvee, made the morning feel less like another mile of attrition and more like something almost holy. John kept his hand there until the baby went still again. He wished, with a force that made his throat hurt, that he could pin the moment in place, not because it was safe. Nothing had been safe in months, maybe years, but because it was good, and goodness had become rare enough to feel medicinal. The old Humvee growled beneath them like a wounded animal too stubborn to die. Ethan had kept it alive through things that should have killed it. He had rebuilt the radiator from scavenged plates and wire mesh in the bunker colony workshop. He had stripped 2 rusted military trucks just to cannibalize 1 steering column and a set of hoses. He had once spent 10 hours on his back beneath the chassis in freezing mud because a cracked line was bleeding fuel faster than he could afford to lose it. He treated the machine the way John treated patients in the infirmary under the bunker colony, with profanity, improvisation, and a refusal to let failure have the last word. Outside, the road ran forward through a country that no longer belonged to people. What had once been an interstate was now a wounded gray ribbon, broken by roots, shouldered aside by brush, and chewed open in places by seasons of freeze and flood and verdant overgrowth. Trees leaned over the lanes from both sides, their crowns meshing high above in places where time had made a tunnel out of abandonment. Green ruled here, but not the soft green John had known from books and old films from before the shattering. This was dense, predatory green. Vines as thick as wrists crept over overturned sedans. Thorn bushes climbed through the skeletons of rest stops. In low places, the undergrowth was so crowded it looked less like plant life and more like pressure made visible. The bunker colony had always said the Verdant Titan made the woods fertile. They did not always say what that fertility cost. Ethan drove one-handed for a moment to rub at the scar along his jaw, then shifted down as the road ahead buckled around the roots of a tree that had forced itself up through the median and decided it had every right to stay there. "If this highway gets any more charming," he said, "I'm taking us cross-country." "No, you're not," John said. "We lose the road. We lose speed." "We already lost speed. What we have now is momentum and prayer." Sarah settled deeper into her seat and adjusted the blanket folded under her lower back. "I don't think prayer likes your tone. Prayer can file a complaint when we reach the city." John leaned forward between the seats enough to see Ethan's profile. His brother looked like he always did when he was concentrating too hard. jaw set, eyes narrowed, one shoulder slightly higher than the other from years of hauling engines, tires, fuel cans, and things much heavier than John had ever liked lifting. Ethan had always been built for work the way John had been built for thought. Even when they were boys, Ethan had been the one who climbed the maintenance shaft first, the one who went above ground on salvage teams earliest, the one who learned how to turn fear into movement. John had learned how to think while afraid. It was useful. It was also, in moments like these, humiliating. How much farther to the next marked stop? Ethan asked. John wiped his thumb across the edge of the map until the inked grid settled in his head again. If the route still holds, a service station around 20 miles, maybe 22. Maybe, which means it's either gone or on fire. Sarah watched the passing tree line through her window. If it has food, I don't care if it's on fire. You say that now, Ethan said, but then we get there and suddenly everybody has standards. John looked back down at the notebook in his lap and made himself write the morning numbers anyway. He wrote slower than usual because the road was bad and because Sarah's hand stayed on his wrist for a few seconds after moving away, as if she knew he needed the tether. Food, low, but manageable if they found anything canned. Water, enough for a day and a half if they were careful, maybe 2 if they were not moving hard. Fuel, enough to reach the marked stop, but not enough to gamble on being wrong. Sarah, tired, still eating, swelling in ankles slightly worse by evening, no bleeding, no contractions. Baby active. Ethan, sleeping less than he admitted. Cough after crystal discharge. Burn redness healing along left forearm. John, tired enough to list himself after supplies. He shut the notebook before he could write afraid. They had left the bunker colony 9 days ago. On paper, the decision had been simple. Sarah was far enough along now that the colony doctor had stopped hiding his worry. They had basic medicines underground. Basic sterile tools, basic knowledge preserved through 3 generations of necessity. John himself had delivered 4 infants in the infirmary, all in conditions he would have called impossible before. Impossible became daily life, but basic was a poor word when paired with childbirth. Basic did not account for hemorrhage. Basic did not account for obstructed labor. Basic did not account for the fact that Verdant territory was getting worse, not better. Supply runs above ground had been returning lighter and bloodier. Animals the hunters used to avoid were vanishing, replaced by things quicker and stranger. Twice in the last 6 months, people had heard something huge moving through the woods beyond the old ventilation masts. Not the Titan itself, something lesser and still more than enough. The Ember City was 2 states south by the old map, maybe more by the roads they actually had left. The city meant clinics, heat, walls above ground high enough to matter. Crystal-powered infrastructure, real birth wards, if half the stories were true. It also meant crowds, radiation, power people could not pretend not to worship, and the possibility that the city would see refugees from a woodland bunker as one more problem best kept outside the gate. But Sarah had put John's hand to her stomach one night in the dark and said very calmly, "I am not giving birth underground if we have another choice." He had known then that the argument was over. He had also known she was right. The service station appeared around noon, like a chipped tooth jutting out of the green. What remained of its sign leaned over the road, at an angle that made it look tired rather than broken. The lot was cracked and furred with moss. One of the pump islands had collapsed on itself and sunk into a shallow ditch of stagnant water. The building still stood, though vines curtained the windows, and one glass panel by the entrance was spiderwebbed white from an old impact. Ethan slowed the Humvee to a crawl, then stopped with the hood facing the road out. He always parked that way now. Never nose in. Never where a quick departure became a 3-point turn. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt large enough to hear for miles. John was already reaching for the revolver before he remembered he hated the thing. He checked it anyway, then tucked it into the back waistband of his pants and climbed out first to help Sarah down. The air outside was damp enough to stick to his skin. Verdant country had a way of making every breath feel shared, as if the woods took something from it before letting it leave your lungs. Heat lingered under the trees despite the shade. Somewhere deeper in the brush, an insect droned once and went quiet. Ethan swung open the rear hatch and started hauling out the reserve cans. "You two loot," he said. "I'll feed this ugly saint and check the back right tire again." John glanced at the tire automatically. Still losing air? Slowly. Could patch it again. Could also perform surgery on myself with a spoon. Some fixes are just insulting. Sarah made a face at both of them. If I have to hear one more metaphor about surgery from either brother, I'm naming the baby without your help. Ethan looked at her over the gas can in his hands. Cruel. Competent, she corrected. John helped her over a cracked stretch of pavement toward the station doors. His hand hovered near her elbow more than touched it. Sarah noticed because she noticed everything and gave him a sidelong look that would have been sharp if she were less tired. I'm walking into a building, she said quietly, not a cliff. I know. You don't act like it. I know that too. The door resisted before giving way with a groan. Inside, the air smelled like mildew, dust, and old sweetness gone sour. Racks lay tipped over in one aisle. The refrigerated cases were dark and open, their glass doors hanging crooked. A whole section of ceiling tiles had collapsed near the back, leaving a fan of dried leaves and dirt over the floor. Yet the station had not been picked clean. Maybe it had been too close to Verdant territory for regular scavenging routes. Maybe people had died trying. Either way, John saw 3 intact shelves of canned goods before his eyes adjusted fully, and for a wild second he felt richer than any man in a city. Sarah exhaled. Well, I'm willing to forgive the fire. Start with high calorie, John said, then drinks, then anything useful we can carry. Yes, doctor. He took the nearest aisle, while Sarah moved more slowly along the wall shelves, one hand resting instinctively under her belly whenever she bent. John found canned fruit, soup, 2 boxes of protein bars that were past whatever old date mattered now, a sealed jar of peanut butter, and a dented tin of powdered electrolyte mix that he nearly kissed. He set everything carefully into a handbasket whose plastic had gone brittle with age. At the medicine shelf near the counter, he got lucky again. Bandages, alcohol wipes, antacids, prenatal vitamins with half the foil still unpunctured, and a blister pack of antibiotics he would have dismissed as useless before the world taught him that some efficacy was better than noble standards. Sarah held up a packet of dried fruit from 2 aisles over. Think this counts as a luxury or a necessity? For you, necessity. For me, or for your blood pressure when I get angry? Yes. She laughed once, quieter this time. The station around them felt too open for full laughter. John. He stacked more cans into the basket until it started to cut into his fingers. What? She had found a seat of sorts behind the counter, an overturned crate that let her take some of the weight off her feet. There were lines of strain around her mouth he wished he could erase with skill instead of wanting. Tell me the truth. He stopped moving. Which one? He asked. The one you keep stepping around. He knew immediately which truth she meant. There had been too many softened edges between them these past days, too many practical conversations shaped around fear, but never naming it directly. How much water? How long before dark? Whether Ethan had enough sleep? Whether the road ahead was passable? Whether Sarah needed to stop? Whether John was watching her too closely? Every question had really been a smaller, safer version of the same one. Are we too late? John set the basket down on the counter and leaned both hands on the dusty laminate. You want the honest answer, as your husband or as a doctor? She considered that. Both. He nodded once because lying would have been easier and she would have known. As your husband, I think about it every hour. As a doctor, I think if we keep moving and nothing goes wrong before we get there, we still have a chance at doing this somewhere better than the bunker. Sarah absorbed that without flinching. And if something goes wrong before we get there? He looked at the floor. His own reflection stared back in fractured pieces from a fallen glass door at his feet. Then I do what I can. That isn't the same as not being afraid. No. His mouth felt dry. It isn't. She came around the counter slowly and stopped in front of him. I'm afraid too, you know. I know. No, you know I'm tired. That's different. He lifted his eyes to hers. Sarah had the kind of face people underestimated because it had softness in it even when she was angry. The bunker had cured most of that mistake in the people who knew her. She had grown up under concrete and emergency lights like he and Ethan had learned to forage above ground, had learned to shoot, had learned to climb quietly and carry more weight than looked fair. Pregnancy had not made her smaller. It had only made risk more visible. "I'm afraid," she said again, "that we left too late. I'm afraid the city won't let us in. I'm afraid the baby will come on the road. I'm afraid I'll look at you and Ethan and know you're both trying to hide the same things from me because you think it helps." Her expression softened. "And I'm afraid of how badly I want this to work." John swallowed. "So am I." The baby moved then, a small rolling shift under Sarah's shirt. Her hand dropped there at once. John followed without thinking and felt the answering kick against both their palms. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah smiled, weary and fierce all at once. "Well, at least one person in this family likes travel." John let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "We're not naming the child after a highway." "You don't know. Maybe interstate would suit them." "No. Route? Absolutely not." "Fine." She tilted her head, as if considering something serious. "Then once we reach the city, we'll just have to find Ethan a wife to distract him from arguing with us, and then the baby can be named after whichever of his children turns out least alarming." John barked a startled laugh before he could stop himself. "No woman in that city deserves that." "There must be at least one who is mean enough." "There probably is," he admitted. "She would need nerves of iron and hearing damage." Sarah leaned into him just enough that he had to steady her by the waist. "See? We're planning ahead. That's practically optimism." He kissed her forehead, because if he kissed her mouth, he might not stop quickly enough, and the world outside was too dangerous for indulgence. "You look awful." "You say the sweetest things." "I mean it medically. That makes it worse." Something moved outside. Not loud, not a crash, more like a sound the light made when it changed. John turned toward the front windows first because instinct had been teaching him ugly lessons for days now. Through the broken glass and the hanging vines, he saw the Humvee angled by the pumps, Ethan bent at the rear quarter panel with a gas can in his hands, and beyond him, at the edge of the lot, where brush had spilled over cracked pavement, a shape stepping out of green, as if the woods themselves had unclenched. At first his mind tried to make it a mass of vines, a bent sapling, a fallen section of hedge moving in the wind. Then it lowered its head and sniffed the ground. John went cold so fast his vision tunneled. It was huge, longer than the hood of the Humvee, low and heavy through the shoulders, with a back ridged in bark-dark plates and a coat layered in moss, rot, and thorny growth that made the outline of it swim. Its head was broad and ugly and still, its muzzle close to the pavement as it worked forward one deliberate step at a time. The silence around it felt manufactured, as if every smaller living thing had made the same calculation and chosen absence. Sarah saw his face and turned before he could speak. He caught her arm hard enough to make her hiss. "Don't," he breathed. Outside, Ethan straightened. The gas can in his hand tipped just enough to spill a dark, glistening line onto the pavement. For one terrible second, John thought his brother had frozen. Then he understood. Ethan was not panicking. He was thinking. The creature moved another step. It did not look toward the building, not yet. It followed the ground, the tire marks, the disturbed dust, the threaded path of their arrival. A hunter, reading the sentence they had written, by existing. Ethan let more gas pour. A sharp chemical scent punched through the mildewed air, even from inside. Then, with a speed that made John's throat close, Ethan set the can down on its side and dropped flat, sliding beneath the Humvee from the far side, just as the creature lifted its head. Sarah's fingers closed around John's forearm like wire. She was breathing through her mouth now, silent and shallow. The beast stood in the center of the lot and tasted the air. Up close, it was worse. John could see root-fine tendrils around the muzzle twitching as it sorted scent, could see the hooked yellow white of teeth beneath a split lip line, could see one forepaw spread slowly across the pavement with pads wide enough to soften its weight into almost nothing. It should have been loud. That size had no right to move like that. Yet all he heard was the distant drip of gasoline and the rabbit-fast thud of his own pulse. It followed the track to the spilled fuel and stopped. The head dipped. The nostrils flared. Confusion, or irritation, moved through the set of its shoulders like weather through brush. Please, John thought, not as prayer exactly, but as a reflex too old to unlearn. Please. Beside him, Sarah shifted her foot an inch. A glass bottle somewhere behind the counter rolled off a shelf. The sound was tiny, a dry clink, then a longer skitter over tile. The creature's head came up so fast it blurred. John pulled Sarah down behind the counter just as the beast roared. The sound hit the building hard enough that dust sifted from the ceiling. It was not merely loud, it was full of territory and hunger and the certainty that something living had been found. Outside metal scraped. The Humvee rocked once. Then another sound cut through the roar from somewhere beyond the lot. Out in the woods to the south, branches cracking in a running chain, something smaller bolting blind through brush. The creature snapped its head toward it. Gasoline still shone black across the pavement. Their scent had become a broken line. The beast made a furious coughing sound deep in its throat, spun, and bounded toward the tree line in 3 impossible lunges, vanishing into green so quickly, John would have doubted the whole sighting if the roar was not still shaking in his bones. For a second, none of them moved. Then Ethan's voice came from outside, low and savage. "Move." John hauled Sarah up. They ran bent low through the doorway. Ethan was already in the driver's seat with one gas can half stowed and the other abandoned where it lay. John shoved the basket into the back, all but lifted Sarah after it, and climbed in on top of the scattered blankets and packs, just as Ethan slammed the vehicle into gear. The Humvee fishtailed over cracked pavement, corrected, and hit the road with a jolt that sent a bolt of pain through John's shoulder. Ethan did not look at him. "Tell me if she's bleeding," Ethan said. "She's not bleeding. Tell me if she starts." John swallowed and checked anyway, because ritual mattered when terror was too large. Sarah's face was white, but she shook her head before he even finished the glance. The station vanished behind them. No one spoke for the first mile. Then Sarah let out a breath that trembled so hard it sounded like someone else. "Was that?" "Yes," Ethan said. John leaned forward between the seats. "You've seen one before?" "Not that close." "What was it?" Ethan's hands were clenched on the wheel. "Bramblemaw, or close enough to count. High tier, big enough to pull a man apart before he finished noticing." John felt sick. "And it had our trail." "Now it does," Ethan said. Sarah's hand found John's again in the back. "Could it follow the Humvee?" "Everything follows the Humvee," Ethan muttered. "Loudest thing in the county." "Not joking," John said. "Neither am I." That set the shape of the rest of the day. After the station, the road no longer felt empty. It felt watched. John kept seeing the beast in every seam of shadow between trunks, every patch of brush that moved against the wind, every stretch of old overpass where green had draped itself in hanging curtains over the sides. Ethan drove harder when the road allowed it, and more carefully when it did not, jaw tight, eyes flicking to the mirrors often enough that John noticed and then hated himself for noticing, because once seen, it could not be unseen. Sarah ate half a protein bar because John made her. He drank too little water because the thought of stopping again made his stomach knot. Near dusk, Ethan pulled them beneath the shelter of a collapsed freight overhang, where concrete walls on 3 sides narrowed their exposure and the road debris forced any approach into noise. He checked the Humvee, then checked it again. The back right tire was worse. The radiator had started running hot. There was a new crack in the bracket, holding one of the reserve racks, and one of the leaf springs made an ugly complaining sound whenever the chassis settled. John tried to sleep in 3-minute pieces and failed each time. Sometime after midnight, a sound came from beyond the overhang, not a footfall, not even a deliberate scrape, just brush whispering where there should have been no wind. Ethan was awake before John, and already holding the fire lance across his knees, the embedded crystal in its housing no brighter than a buried ember. He did not stand, he only listened. The sound went away. No one slept after that. By morning, John understood the thing that unsettled him most about the Bramblemaw. It was not its size or its teeth or the way it had arrived at the station like the forest walking on purpose. It was that it seemed to know patience. Most predators John had seen above ground announced themselves through haste eventually. Hunger made things sloppy. Territory made them loud. Even men got less careful when they believed time was theirs. This creature did not. It behaved as if time belonged to it, and they were simply moving inside that ownership. The next 2 days turned into a long education in being pursued. They found tracks once in a wash of drying mud where the road dipped low, paw marks broad as plates, partly softened by moisture and still somehow precise, paralleling their tire line for half a mile before dissolving back into brush. Sarah found fur snagged on a ruined guardrail, coarse and dark with green threads woven naturally through it. John spotted a deer carcass near an on-ramp, half-eaten and abandoned, just close enough to the road that the message felt intentional. Ethan saw all of it and said less each time. By the fourth evening, the land itself had begun to change in subtle ways. The green remained thick, but the soil under it grew drier. Rock showed through more often where roots could not bully it aside. The air carried occasional threads of warmth that did not belong to the season, and once John saw a smear of ash on the cracked hood after driving through what looked like ordinary mist. Ember influence, maybe, or just the first weather of it. Sarah felt the baby kick more often now. Sometimes she would go quiet in the middle of a bad stretch of road and put her own hand low over her stomach, face turned slightly away, listening inward. John lived for those moments and feared them equally. Life moved there. So did the clock. On the fifth day, the Bramblemaw stopped waiting. It happened at a bottleneck where the highway had buckled inward around the collapsed husk of a transport truck. Ethan had to crawl the Humvee along the shoulder, 2 tires on broken asphalt and 2 in tangled scrub, while John watched the brush with the revolver in his hand and knew it would do almost nothing. The beast came from the left in a burst of green-brown mass and impact. Something slammed the side of the Humvee hard enough to drive Sarah against John and John into the opposite door. Metal screamed. Ethan fought the wheel with both hands while the vehicle skidded sideways through brush and half-mounted the lip of the ditch. "Out!" John shouted. "No." The Bramblemaw hit them again. John saw it this time through the cracked side mirror. A low, monstrous shape pacing the moving vehicle, bark ridges along the shoulders flashing between branches. One forelimb hooked at the rear quarter panel, as if testing for purchase. Ethan swore, yanked the wheel, and the Humvee lurched clear for 6 yards before the beast darted in front of them, not to meet the bumper, to make Ethan choose between wrecking or slowing. Ethan chose violence. He snatched the fire lance from beside the seat with one hand, braced the shaft against the door frame, and thumbed the crystal release with his palm. Light flared red-orange along the grooves etched into the spearhead. Heat rolled backward through the cabin at once, dry and savage after so many days of verdant wet. The Bramblemaw lunged across the hood. Ethan drove the lance through the open side window and struck. Flame punched out, not as a stream but as a compressed burst, a fist of ember-bright force that hit the beast across the face and shoulder. Fur and moss flashed alight. The creature screamed, a rawer sound than its roar, and dropped away into brush as Ethan wrenched the lance back in, the cabin filled with the smell of scorched rot and hot metal. Ethan's breath caught. John saw the tremor in his brother's hand before Ethan hit it by slamming the shaft down against the floorboard. "Ethan, I'm fine." His left forearm was red to the elbow. Thin threads of heat shimmered above the skin. John leaned forward, medical instinct finally louder than fear. "Show me. Drive first, medicine second." The Humvee surged through the gap and out the other side. No further impact came, only the sound of the engine working too hard and Sarah's breathing as she fought for control. When Ethan finally slowed half an hour later beneath a stand of dry pines, John forced the issue. He took Ethan's wrist and turned the arm over despite the glare he got for it. The burn was not external, not exactly. The skin was flushed from beneath, as if the heat had traveled the vessels and not the surface. There were tiny burst capillaries along the inner elbow. Ethan's pulse kicked too fast under John's fingers. "Radiation response," John said quietly, "and strain." Ethan looked away toward the trees. "It's a B rank. It's supposed to strain. Not like this." Worked, didn't it? Sarah was leaning against the doorframe with one hand under her belly, her face pale and furious at once. "You almost blacked out." "I did not. You swayed. I am wounded by your lack of faith." John wrapped the forearm anyway, though the bandage was more reminder than treatment. "If you discharge like that again, wait longer between bursts." Ethan gave him a flat look. "I'll tell the monster to schedule around me." John almost snapped back. Instead he said, "I'm serious." "So am I." Ethan's voice softened by half a degree, which for him counted as tenderness. "I know what I'm holding." John believed that. He also knew it did not help. By evening, the road had broken apart entirely. They spent 3 hours threading county back roads and half-remembered service lanes through a region that had once been suburbs and now looked like the earth trying to forget houses had ever existed. Roofs caved in under vines. Fences disappeared into walls of brush. Here and there, old brick chimneys stood alone, like monuments to vanished rooms. The Humvee's suspension complained constantly. The back right tire lost enough air that Ethan had to patch it again by flashlight, while John stood watch and Sarah sat on the curb of a dead cul-de-sac with both hands on her stomach, listening to the baby move. "I think they like the stopping part," she murmured when John knelt in front of her with the water bottle. "I like the stopping part, too." "You don't look like it. I'm trying to improve my face." She smiled faintly and drank. "When we get somewhere real again, you should sleep for a week. When we get somewhere real again, Ethan should sleep for a month." Sarah looked past him to where Ethan was cursing at a jack stand. "He won't." "No. He'll find an engine to rebuild so he can avoid having feelings." John sat back on his heels. "That does sound like him." She was quiet a moment, then said, "If we make it, promise me something." John heard the if, but did not touch it. "What?" "If there's an actual doctor in that city better than you, and there will be, let them be better. Don't try to carry everything because you think you should." He smiled without humor. "That sounds like a promise designed specifically to insult me." "It's designed specifically to keep you alive." He touched her knee. "Then yes." The Humvee died the next afternoon, not all at once. It gave them warning like an old workhorse finally admitting its age. First, the temperature needle climbed and refused to settle. Then the engine started coughing on inclines. Then a crack in the patched fuel line sprayed the underside in a glittering mist Ethan smelled before he saw. He got them off the road and under the shade of a rock, cut before the leak could become a funeral pyre. John watched him work for an hour with hands blackened to the wrist, jaw set, breath shortening each time he had to wedge himself farther under the frame. At last, Ethan slid out and sat in the dirt. That frightened John more than the leak. Ethan did not sit when there was work to do. "Well?" John asked. Ethan wiped a forearm across his face and left a streak of grease there. "I can patch the line. I can cool the engine. I cannot magically replace a cracked housing and a spring that wants to leave the chat." "Can it move?" "For a little. Maybe enough to make the next ridge." "Maybe. Maybe." Sarah pushed herself out of the passenger seat and stood by the open door until John reached for her. "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're deciding whether to lie." He exhaled. "We may need to go on foot." For a second, nobody said anything. The wind over the cut carried a thread of warmth and something else with it, faint but distinct. Ash again, south, close enough now that the air itself had started changing allegiance. Ethan rose with a grunt and looked down the road. "Then we lighten up and we keep moving." John stared at the Humvee, at the patched armor plates, at the old dashboard where Ethan had once scratched a rude drawing into the plastic with a nail because he had been 15 and bored on maintenance duty, at the blankets in the back, the spare parts, the tools, the machine that had carried them through hundreds of miles of dangerous country. It felt obscene to leave it. It felt more obscene to pretend they had a choice. They got another 6 miles before the final failure. A grinding crack sounded from beneath the chassis as they climbed a rocky service road, twisting through red-brown stone. The Humvee lurched, sank hard to one side, and rolled to a stop in a shower of gravel. Ethan killed the engine. No one moved for several seconds. Then he said very softly, "That'll do it." The rear assembly had split enough that even John could see it from where he stood. The wheel canted inward at a hopeless angle. One of the supports had snapped clean through. Ethan crouched beside it with both hands on his thighs and did not swear at all this time. Sarah looked from the broken vehicle to the road ahead. It wound upward between stone outcroppings and sparse trees. The undergrowth here was thinner than before. The green shot through with dry grass and black rock. Far to the south, beyond the next rise, a dull redness bruised the horizon even through daylight haze. John saw Ethan see it too. "Ember influence," John said. "Yeah." "How far?" Ethan stood. "Close enough that the beast won't like it. Not close enough to save us if it finds us first." They packed in silence. Water, food, medicine. The maps, though, John doubted they mattered now. The revolver. Ethan's tool roll until its weight became unreasonable, and he cut it in half with brutal efficiency. The fire lance, Sarah's blanket, 2 extra shirts. Nothing sentimental, except the things they never admitted were sentimental. John's notebook, Sarah's little cloth bundle of keepsakes from the bunker, Ethan's wrench with the cracked rubber grip that fit his hand too well to leave behind. When John moved to shoulder the heaviest pack, Ethan took it from him without comment and strapped it over his own. "I can carry it," John said. "I know." That was worse? They had gone perhaps 2 miles on foot when the Bramblemaw found them again. The first sign was birds exploding from a stand of scrub below the road. The second was Sarah stopping so abruptly, John nearly walked into her because the baby had kicked hard enough to steal her breath. Then came a rustle behind them that had too much weight in it. Ethan turned first, already swinging the fire lance free. "Run," he said. The Bramblemaw came up the slope through broken rock and dry brush with burn scars striping half its body and one eye clouded white. Parts of its face still looked hairless and angry, where Ethan's earlier burst had marked it. The sight of those wounds sent a jagged, impossible pulse of hope through John. Ethan had heard it. Ethan could hurt it again. Then the beast roared and the hope changed shape. "Go!" Ethan shouted. John grabbed Sarah's hand and ran. That choice would live inside him for the rest of his life, not because it was wrong, because it was the kind of rightness that scarred. Behind them, the fire lance discharged with a concussive crack. Heat washed over their backs. The Bramblemaw screamed. Sarah stumbled on loose rock, and John caught her under the arm, half guiding, half carrying, as they forced themselves up the slope toward the next crest. Another burst, another roar, Ethan swearing, rock shattering. John looked back once and saw his brother between them and the beast exactly as if the world had arranged itself around that truth. Ethan stood planted wide in the road, the lance blazing red through its channels, driving the Bramblemaw sideways each time it tried to angle around him. It did not want him. John saw that with awful clarity. It wanted the slower prey uphill. Ethan was making himself into the more immediate problem. "John," Sarah gasped. He turned forward again. The slope steepened. His lungs burned. Sarah's grip on his hand had gone from human to desperate. Behind them, the battle moved in broken bursts of sound. A slam, a discharge, a roar, silence, then another impact that felt like something huge colliding with stone. Then came the sound of the lance breaking. John knew it at once. A sharp metallic snap followed by a shorter, uglier crack and the sudden absence of the weapon's distinct discharge tone. He stopped. Sarah almost tore free trying to drag him onward and failed. "No," he said, already turning. Ethan was on one knee in the road below. The shaft of the lance had snapped near the housing. The spearhead lay several yards away among broken rock. The Bramblemaw circled him with its head low and one ruined eye streaming wet into the burned fur. It was hurt, badly hurt, but alive and too close. Ethan looked uphill. John could not hear him over the distance, the wind, the blood in his ears, but he knew the shape of that shout. "Go!" Then Ethan did something John did not understand until it was too late to matter. He tore the crystal from the broken housing. Even at that distance, the thing burned red-orange in his hand. B-rank, faceted, unstable now that the weapon no longer held it in channels and braces and safe paths. John knew enough about crystals to understand how wrong it was for that much ember density to sit bare in human flesh. Misalignment increased fracture risk. Overdraw caused cracks, dormancy, inversion. Those were tidy words from old notes and preserved manuals. They did not cover this. They did not cover a man putting raw fire in his own body, because there was nothing else left to burn through. "No!" John heard himself shout. Ethan bit down. The crystal shattered between his teeth in a burst of light like swallowed sparks. He threw his head back, choking once, then stood. Heat hit the road in a visible wave. For one impossible second, Ethan did not look human at all. Not fully. Light moved under his skin in ember-bright threads. Smoke curled from his mouth when he exhaled. The veins along his neck and forearms lit red as if blood had become a map of molten metal beneath the flesh. He dropped the broken haft and clenched both hands, and the air around him wavered. The Bramblemaw hesitated. Then Ethan charged. What happened next unstitched the line between man and weapon. He met the beast head-on with his bare hands burning. One fist drove into its shoulder and exploded in a bloom of fire that hurled ash and scorched fur in every direction. The Bramblemaw reeled. Ethan seized its ridged neck with his other hand, and the contact alone raised smoke. The beast thrashed, claws raking sparks from stone, but Ethan stayed on it with the blind momentum of a collapsing star. Each strike landed hotter, wilder. Flame bled from his knuckles. The burned side of the Bramblemaw lit again, its ruined eye turned to steam. It screamed, and John felt that scream through his ribs. Hope came back, dangerous and bright. "He's winning," Sarah said, and there was wonder and terror braided equally in her voice. For a few seconds, it was true. Ethan drove the beast sideways into a rock shelf hard enough to crack stone. He hammered another burning fist into the side of its skull. One good eye squeezed shut against the heat. The creature staggered, half blind now, scars and open burns striping its shoulders, neck, and face. Ethan shoved forward, step by scorching step, and John saw the shape of the end gathering. The Bramblemaw dropped low, trying to twist free, and passed him toward the slope. Ethan pivoted with it. His left hand caught in the burned ruff along the creature's neck. His right fist drew back. Fire swelled around it, dense and bright and terrible. He was going to punch through the side of the beast's head. John knew it with the clean certainty of nightmare. One more strike, one more impossible act. Ethan had done it. He had actually done it. They were all going to... Ethan stopped. Not willingly, not dramatically, he simply stopped. The fist stayed drawn back, the shoulder locked. The fire around the hand guttered once. John saw the change move through him like cooling lava under cracking rock. The ember light in his veins dimmed from orange-white to sullen red. Black spread over the skin of his forearm and up the side of his throat in branching lines. His stance held, but too rigidly now, too fixed. The heat pouring off him changed from furnace blast to the radiating burden of something trying and failing to stay liquid. "Ethan!" John screamed. The Bramblemaw felt it too. The beast, half blind and bleeding smoke, wrenched against Ethan's grip. The burning hand on its neck no longer tightened. The killing fist did not fall. For one suspended, horrible beat predator and prey both understood the same thing. The danger was ending. The Bramblemaw tore free. It did not flee downhill, not yet. It bounded back 3 paces, head low, one eye ruined, the other wild and fixed on Ethan's rigid form. Ethan still stood there in mid-attack, fist drawn, body blackening by the heartbeat into a statue of motion, arrested at the point of violence. Cracks of dull ember ran through the darkening surface of his skin. Smoke leaked from his mouth once, then no more. The beast made a rough choke sound, part fear, part rage. Then it looked uphill, at John, at Sarah, at the future Ethan had bought and almost defended all the way to safety. "Run," Sarah said, and her voice broke on the word. John could not move. She hit him, not hard, hard enough. "John!" The beast launched. They ran. There was no grace left in it now, only survival. John half-dragged Sarah over the final rise as the Bramblemaw closed the distance behind them in wet, ragged breaths. Rock crumbled underfoot. The air grew hotter. The vegetation thinned to low brush and black grass clinging stubbornly between outcrops of dark stone. Somewhere ahead, the wind carried a dry, metallic smell and the faintest vibration under the ground, like distant machinery, too massive to see. The Bramblemaw roared behind them. John expected impact, teeth, weight, the end. Instead, the roar cut off in fury. He stumbled and turned just in time to see the beast skid to a halt no more than 20 feet behind them. There was nothing on the ground between, no painted line, no wall, no change a human eye could mark beyond the subtle shift in heat and ash and stone. But the Bramblemaw would not cross. Its paws dug into the dirt, its scarred head thrust forward, nostrils flaring against air that must have tasted like another power's claim. One burned eye was gone. The other blazed with hunger and hatred. It stared at them, then past them, south, toward the unseen city. It roared once, not at prey now, but at a territory it refused to violate. The sound rolled over the stone and came back smaller. The beast lingered one terrible second more, ribs heaving, then spun and bounded back the way it had come, vanishing among the rocks and dying brush in a series of loping leaps. Gone. Sarah folded where she stood, not fainting so much as obeying gravity after too long defying it. John dropped with her, catching her shoulders, then her face, then both hands because he did not know what else to hold. She was crying. He realized dimly that so was he. The baby kicked again between them. John laughed once, and it came out broken. When he could breathe enough to look, he turned back toward the rise. Ethan was still visible in the distance. Even from here, the pose was clear. Mid-strike, one hand fused into the burned rough it had nearly torn away. The other clenched and drawn back, ready to drive the last killing punch into the side of the beast's head. He stood like a blackened figure carved from cooled volcanic stone, caught forever in the instant before victory. Around him, the road and the rocks were scorched in a rough half-circle. Heat shimmer still rose faintly from the place, or perhaps John imagined it because the alternative was that everything had truly gone still. Legacy, John thought without meaning to, and the word hurt so badly he almost bent in half with it. Sarah followed his gaze. For a long time they stayed there, kneeling on the far side of a border neither of them could see, looking back at the shape of the man who had stood between them and the world, and refused to move even after death made moving impossible. At last, Sarah wiped her face with the heel of one hand and got 1 foot beneath her. John rose with her. Southward, the heat deepened. The unseen city waited somewhere beyond the folds of black rock and ash-lit haze, beyond the last miles Ethan had bought with his body. John put one arm around Sarah's back. She leaned into him. Together, they turned away from the monument on the road and began to walk toward a future that had already cost them more than they could count.